Hello, my name is Russ Galvin with Colorado Crane Operator School, and I want to talk to you today or continue the series about roles and responsibilities when it comes to rigger and signal person. And often they are the same individual on a job site, but the standards treat them as two separate roles. But for the intents of the purpose of this video, I'm going to group them underneath the same hat because once again, they are often the same individual. Pretty much one of the primary roles of that rigger, right now we'll discuss about that, is to understand safe rigging procedures, basic rigging procedures that are appropriate for the lifting conditions, whether they're going to be using a vertical hitch, a choker hitch, a basket hitch. They really want to make sure that they understand those basic rigging procedures because one of the primary reasons is you want to hoist that load and you do not want those slings to what we call run or to shift, and you don't want that load to shift, because that can cause that dynamic effect, can cause that shock loading onto that crane, which can have potential disastrous results. With that also being said, they also need to understand the basic understanding of what working load limit is in relationship to the weight of the load, and how to choose the appropriate sling size, how to use the appropriate size shackle, understand if I'm going to have 2 connection points, 3 connection points, 4 connection points, depending on whatever is being hoisted. They need to understand how to choose the appropriate size sling, the appropriate size shackle, and all of the rigging hardware. That means, saying all that, for the weight of the load. They also need to understand basic sling angles and how the relationship, how decreasing that sling angle causes an increase of sling stress. Because 60 degrees is what they call that ideal rigging triangle. It's something they need to understand, and how to achieve a 60-degree angle in the field. And just kind of a quick recap, it's, the distance in between your 2 rigging connections will equal the same distance of your sling length in relationship over the top of the load. So that will help you get that 60 degrees. Often that 45 degrees is often the minimum allowable sling angle for a lot of companies. Just because what happens when you get down to 30 degrees, which is pretty much the standard minimum sling angle, the amount of stress on a sling at 30 degrees is significantly more than the amount of stress than on a sling that's at 45 or 60 degrees. But as a rigger, they definitely need to understand what sling angles and what that does to sling stress. They also need to be able to properly apply softeners of the slings or to the slings. Softeners are often much more than just protecting the load itself, but it's designed to protect the sling from any kind of abrasions, because a lot of those abrasions that happen with the load or the sling as it comes contact with the load happens obviously on the inside. So it's nothing that you can see on the outside until either that sling that load's been landed and you pull that sling out from underneath it. So it's definitely the rigger's job to understand that. They definitely need to understand any kind of special hardware that they may be using, any kind of special connection points, make sure that they have, they meet all the OSHA and ASME standards, they met the inspection criteria, all the requirements that are part of each one of those. And then of course, they also need to conduct their inspections and remove any slings or hardware that meets the removal criteria. With that also being said, if they have any slings or hardware that they are in question, that they're not 100% sure, remove it from service for the time being until a qualified individual can inspect and either put it back into service or destroy it, and destroy it so it no longer gets used. And then finally, that rigger needs to understand the relationship of power lines, or any other kind of obstructions, and then how to communicate with that operator to keep that load from hitting those obstructions, or allow that load from hitting that crane boom as well. So that means they got to use tags lines as necessary, then that's what they may need to use. But once again, it's that rigger's job to make sure that load is able to maintain, to be lifted in a safe, vertical fashion, because that's one of the key things too, is that load needs to be needs to be vertical underneath that boom tip, so you don't get excessive movement of that load in relationship to that crane radius, which could potentially put that crane outside of its radius, and which would put it maybe potentially outside of its rated capacity. So they definitely need to be able to communicate with that. So, but when you go along the lines of communication, how you communicate directly with the crane operator, it's going to be more that qualified signal person. Now, to be a qualified signal person, there's a couple things that needs to happen. You need to successfully pass a practical exam and successfully pass some sort of written exam, whether that's done by a third party or whether that's done in-house. But as a qualified signal person, they need to be able to make sure they do that. They also need to have a basic understanding of what crane dynamics, what tube locking is, and drift and shock loading, and how all those things will affect the crane. So that's appropriate. And they also need to know basic hand signals, and know the hand signals to communicate with the crane and how to properly apply them. And so that way they can understand and be on that same page with that operator and understand when they give the appropriate signal, that the operator will understand and be able to put that load in position and obviously maintain safe operations. They also need to be able to speak clearly and have verbal contact, right? Whenever giving signals over the radio, right? So if it's an individual who just cannot speak clearly and cannot, who mumbles, then it may not be the best type of individual to be on the radio when communicating with the operator. And with that also being said, only one person should be communicating with the operator at all points in time, so that way there's not conflicting information going back and forth. So I just want to kind of recap those roles and responsibilities of a rigger and signal person. Thank you, and have a great day.